Now that Resident Evil 5 Remake is in early stages of development, here are some ideas and concepts I believe should remain in the game, be removed from the game, and be altered in the game. Go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, and if you want, the notification bell. This will help the video reach a larger audience, and quite frankly, I want to know all of your opinions. The first and most important concept to be altered in Resident Evil 5 Remake is the depiction of Africa and its inhabitants. Let's take a trip down memory lane, back to 2005, when Resident Evil 5 first premiered at the Tokyo Game Show. The reveal trailer showed off new graphical improvements along with improved gameplay mechanics. After all, Resident Evil 5 was developed for next-gen consoles, the PS3 and Xbox 360 at the time. Everything looked and played great, except for one very noticeable problem. There was a white American man shooting and killing black infected Africans. This did not hold over well with critics, and Capcom chose to make the necessary adjustments before the game's official release. Before I continue any further, you should know Capcom chose Africa as the game's location because in Resident Evil, Africa is the place of origin for the progenitor virus and the place of origin for humankind. Africa being the place of origin for humankind is an actual real-life fact. Now, the backlash Capcom received from critics was actually a great thing because it introduced co-op multiplayer to the Resident Evil franchise. Capcom introduced Sheva Alomar, a female African member from the BSAA. To counter criticism, Capcom made the brilliant call to add her as Chris's partner. However, while the decision was a great one and took heat off of Chris killing infected Africans, Capcom failed to portray Africa in certain sections of the game. Capcom now has a great opportunity to show gamers and critics a side of Africa that has never been portrayed in any video game. Africa is actually the wealthiest continent in the world. The resources there are unbelievably valuable. The people are very intelligent, and yes, there are tribes that have been around for centuries. Also, the lands of Africa is vast and beautiful. I honestly cannot wait to see Africa in the RE engine. This remake will be Capcom's most challenging one yet, but the payoff, should they do it right, will be extraordinary. Returning back to co-op, Resident Evil 5 was enjoyable for many reasons, but being able to play with a friend brings home the gold medal. Not only could you couch play in Resident Evil 5, but players could also play together online. It goes without saying, Resident Evil 5 Remake needs to bring back co-op. Along with co-op, Mercenaries needs to return as well. Having co-op and Mercenaries in the RE engine will make Resident Evil 5 Remake's Mercenaries the best to date. The only way for Resident Evil 4 Remake to stand a chance is for Capcom to add co-op, and we all know that's not going to happen. One added mechanic in the Resident Evil 4 Remake was the knife parry. For the first time ever, players could counter incoming attacks. Having the knife parry return in Resident Evil 5 would be greatly appreciated. It was a relief being able to counter incoming attacks from even the bosses of Resident Evil 4 Remake. Although, for Resident Evil 5 Remake, one boss I would like not to be able to counter is Albert Wesker. He's a master of Kung Fu, and honestly, it should be impossible to counter him. However, being able to go toe-to-toe, blow for blow, with Wesker would make for one badass showdown. Along with the knife pairing returning, Resident Evil 5 Remake should include a dodge mechanic from Resident Evil 3 Remake, as well as the crouch mechanic from Resident Evil 4 Remake. I want Resident Evil 5 Remake to give us all the gameplay options in one package. QuickTime events played a major role in Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6, and the re-engineering done in Resident Evil 4 Remake was executed well by Capcom. Going forward, with Resident Evil 5 Remake, I think Capcom should take the same approach, only have the QTEs in places where they are needed the most. After the release of Resident Evil 5, Capcom released DLC called Lost in Nightmares a prologue story with Chris and Jill searching for Spencer and ended up encountering Wesker. Lost in Nightmares is arguably the series' best DLC ever and was the first ever release for Resident Evil. Lost in Nightmares was originally intended for the main game, but did not make it into the final product. This prologue story should return in the remake for multiple reasons. The first obvious reason is the resemblance to the OG mansion from Resident Evil. If Capcom doesn't plan to release a remake of Resident Evil, bringing back Lost in Nightmares will give the fans the closest experience to Resident Evil in regards to the mansion the DLC takes place in. Resident Evil 5 Remake will be action driven, even more so than Resident Evil 4 Remake, and for those of you who have played Resident Evil 4 Remake, you know the action was handled well and was a major increase from Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes. Lost in Nightmare could begin the game with the emphasis on horror as you traverse through the mansion looking for Spencer. Along with horror, they could bring back puzzles as well, making the first hour or two dedicated to reliving the mansion incident through the RE engine. Keeping Lost in Nightmares in the main game not only increases the overall experience, but allows for Capcom to cut other sections of the game. For example, the random El Gigante boss fight. I get it was intended to be a reference to Resident Evil 4, but it could be handled much better in the remake. If Capcom wants to keep the Hummer shootout section, that's fine. Personally, I feel keeping it in the game will allow for the RE engine to show off the beautiful lands of Africa. As for fighting El Gigante in the back of a Hummer, no thanks, bro. Instead, Capcom should utilize the nights of the town more, have players traverse through the streets of Kijuju at night or bring back the horror element. Maybe, instead of El Gigante, another stronghold defense like in Resident Evil 4 Remake, that would be a much better reference. We are just in the beginning days of Resident Evil 5 Remake. By the time of its release, we would have played Resident Evil 9 and hopefully Revelations 3. I personally believe every Resident Evil remake will be a huge success, with each release bringing more fans to the franchise. The future is bright for Resident Evil, and more specifically Resident Evil 5 Remake. If you enjoyed this video and would like a part 2, then drop a like. If this video gets 200 likes, I will make a part 2. Thanks for watching, and remember, survive the horror with purple herb.